Hello, everybody. Sawyer here, and welcome to my next installment in my top 5 generational heroes series, where I basically go through each decade and basically take my top 5 favorite characters that were conceived or basically rebranded during that time, the highlight of their career, and go over them and discuss why I like these characters and why they matter. And this is the third installment. We're up to the 1950s now. Now, this was kind of a harder list to put together than, say, the 1940s one because of how, just because of how limited the characters were in this time. This is during the kind of the in between period whenever the superhero comics were on the decline, and because of boat burnings and all kinds of political issues and such, superhero comics were considered a bad influence and all this. So they weren't making as many. They weren't selling nearly as good. I think the only superheroes that were really still going ongoing comics was like Superman and Batman. Like the colossal ones. But but the era did bring in some interesting offbeat heroes from different genres and stuff that I would like to discuss. So we're gonna jump into that. At number 5, we have Astro Boy. The famous manga Japanese character, superhero character. He's basically a boy that is, if I remember right, he's a boy that's gets in an accident and he either dies or gets hurt really bad, and his father is like a scientist that remakes him as a robot. I think his dad remakes a robot that has the mind of his son or something like that. Regardless, it's a classic. It's a classic character. Great art. Very unique and creative art. Always part of the fun of Astro Boy is always seeing all the kinds of crazy robot monsters he was fighting every issue or every story. This picture is an American comic book, Goki of him, licensed book, but the classic mangas are truly something special. It's also worth noting that Astro Boy was one of the first characters to really be a superhero that was also a child. At least in mind and spirit anyway. That was kind of a thing that didn't really happen back then in comic books. You usually kids were sidekicks. Spider-Man was kind of the first American character superhero to really kind of break that mold, but Astro Boy was pretty above the curve on that, I think. Next up, we have Deadshot at number 4. I know what you're thinking. This doesn't look like Deadshot. Not Deadshot I know, but this is Deadshot from his original 1953, I think, appearance, in which he is he's basically trying to, he's a criminal, but he's trying to act like he's a vigilante in this story to try to run Batman out of town, make people think that they don't need Batman anymore, so they'll try to push him out so he can become the city's vigilante, but then just switch over and start robbing people. It's kind of a silly plot, but it's an interesting costume. You can definitely tell what they're going for with this costume, kind of a Zorro, masked man kind of look with his 2 pistols, and that was the kind of the idea, is that he's a vigilante that uses guns, which is supposed to be, I guess, more effective than Batman. The cool thing about this first appearance is that Batman defeats him at the end of the story and causes him to miss or whatever, which is the first time he's ever missed a shot in his history, and at least at this point in the timeline. And what happens is, for a while when Deadshot appears next time, he's got this phobia with Batman, like it's like a mental psychosis thing where every time he fights Batman, he always seems to miss, even though his aim is perfect and he's got the perfect advantage. He always seems to miss and can never get a kill shot on Batman, and it's this whole mental thing. And I don't think they still do that anymore with the comics version of Deadshot, but I always liked that aspect of his character, that Batman just effed him up really bad mentally for years. Next up, we have John Jones, the Martian Manhunter. He originally appeared in a comic called Showcase, which also was the first appearance of a lot of other major characters. And he's basically a Martian. In this original story, they don't give a whole lot of insight into his character. He's basically a Martian that gets teleported to Earth by this scientist that's working on like a transportation type of beam or something. And when Martian Manhunter gets there, the doctor is so shocked by the appearance of an alien that he actually has a heart attack and dies, if I remember right. So Martian Manhunter has no real purpose. He's kind of just stuck on Earth now. So he decides to shapeshift into a human form, become a detective, and basically just kind of help solve crimes and help better the world. Martian Manhunter is one of those characters that like was never really properly done in the Silver Age. He was established to have all these powers, but he never really used them, especially in the Justice League stories. In the Justice League stories, he was always using his super breath for some reason, and not much else, because they established he could shapeshift and all this and read minds, but he never really used that much. But in reality, Martian Manhunter, as we all know, is a vastly powerful character, very like up there with Superman, very powerful, especially with his multitude of abilities. And he is a very classic character. I mean, classic original founding member of the JLA. So yeah, definitely worth a spot in this list. At number 2, we have the second version of the Flash, Barry Allen, that was first appearing in Showcase Comics in this classic cover where he's coming right off the film. Even though it's a comic book story, so that doesn't really make a lot of sense, But anyway, it's not important. So the Flash is, a character that was already established way back in Flash comics in the 1940s. I mentioned Jay Garrett in my 1940s Generational Heroes video, and that is my favorite Flash. My second favorite Flash would be Wally West. Barry Allen's actually my least favorite of the major Flashes. I just find his personality to be not as interesting, but you can't really mistake his or ignore his presence in the comic book world and how major of a character he is. So he definitely earns a spot on this list, regardless if I actually personally like the character all that much. But I do like the costume design. I think the redesign of the Flash costume is worlds better than the Jay Garrett costume. Even though I do like the helmet, the full face mask, and the full bodysuit is very, very interesting, and it's a product of its time. It's very much something that makes sense that came out of the 60s or the 50s and the Silver Age, the Atomic Age, So yeah. Also, this is one of the first mainstream comics I know of to really get meta with its storytelling. Because in the Flash, not in this first issue, but in Stories of the Flash from the 60s, he's reading the comics of another Flash. It might be in the first issue actually. I'm not too sure. But the Flash basically reads stories of the other Flash, Jay Garrett, from the other Earth that they established in this, back then in the Silver Age. And it was really trippy because, your superhero is getting inspired by another superhero that's a real superhero stories were created of him in the 40s. And it was just kind of this weird thing that I could just imagine how weird it was back then for readers, in the 50s, reading that kind of stuff. I can't really think of any earlier examples of meta storytelling like that, where the comic book character is aware that there's another comic book character or whatever, Even though they are in separate worlds and they kind of explain it like that, It is an interesting concept that is used all the time nowadays. And number 1, I have the Challengers of the Unknown. It's in the name, Unknown. Sorry, that was a Teen Titans Go reference. But the Challengers of the Unknown are one of my favorite superhero teams. I really like them. They're really fun, interesting characters. I don't really get a whole lot of exposure. They do have an ongoing series right now, or a mini series right now, but it's not really all that great in my opinion. The Challengers are essentially the Fantastic Four before the Fantastic Four was made. They came out like a couple years before, and it's essentially a team of 4 guys that all have different skill sets. One of them's a pilot, one of them's like a boxer or a fighter or something. The other one's an acrobat. The other one's a scientist that's really smart. And they all basically, they're all people that live on borrowed time. They all had some kind of near-death experience or experience that should have killed them, but for some reason it didn't. And they feel like they're living on borrowed time, and they should use this time they've been given for a greater purpose. Somehow they all end up meeting each other, and they fight a monster or something, and then they end up becoming a team that goes and fights monsters and fights the unknown and supernatural kind of threats. Not so much supernatural. I think it's more sci-fi, but they're always fighting monsters and aliens and stuff. And it was just a vehicle for really, really crazy out there stories and monster designs, and I've always really admired characters that don't use powers, they don't rely on their superpowers or don't have superpowers. They just have to rely on their wits and their physical skills and their cleverness. I really enjoy characters like that, and the Challengers are characters like that. They don't have any powers. It actually feels more like Johnny Quest, But if everybody in the show was race banning, like if everybody was adults, like if Johnny was an adult and Haji was an adult, that kind of feels like what the Challenges of the Unknown would be. And they even have a Challenger Mountain that's very kind of reminiscent of like the Baxter Building and all that. It's like their secret headquarters, and it's just a fun time, man. Like classics, classic early Silver Age super team stuff. So thank you guys for watching. This has been my video. Stay tuned for the next one, which will be the 1960s, which will be a fun time because there's a lot of characters that came out during that era. And see you guys.